The date is June 15, 1941. The location is the scorching, unforgiving limestone plateau of Halfaya Pass, on the border of Libya and Egypt. The British Army, flushed with confidence, has launched Operation Battle Axe. They believe they have the technological edge. Their Matilda II tanks are the queens of the desert, heavily armored behemoths that have shrugged off every German anti-tank shell thrown at them for the past year. German 37mm shells simply bounce off the Matilda's thick hide like pebbles off a steel drum. The British tankers are laughing. They feel invincible. Major Miles, commanding the Siege Squadron of the 4th Royal Tank Regiment, looks through his periscope. The heat shimmer distorts the horizon, but the path ahead seems clear. There are no enemy tanks in sight. Just some low ridges and dug-in infantry positions. He orders the advance. The Matildas rumble forward, their engines groaning, tracks churning the sand. They are closing in for the kill. Then, without a warning shot, without the whine of a falling bomb, the lead tank simply disintegrates. A millisecond later, a crack like a thunderclap splits the desert air. Before the crew of the second tank can process what has happened, their turret is ripped cleanly off the chassis. Panic sets in. The British radio net dissolves into chaos. Where is it coming from? I can't see the muzzle flash, cries one commander. The shells are coming from over a mile away, flying flat and fast, faster than sound. There is no arc. There is no escape. Within minutes, 11 of the 12 Matildas in the squadron are burning wrecks, their crews dead or scrambling into the sand, choking on black smoke. They had prepared for a tank battle. They had prepared for artillery. But they were not prepared for this. They had just ridden into the sights of a weapon that, according to the military rulebooks of the time, wasn't supposed to be pointing at them at all. They had been destroyed by an anti-aircraft gun. This is the story of the Flugabwehrkanone 18, the Flak 88. It was a weapon designed to shoot down airplanes at 25,000 feet, born from a loophole in a peace treaty, and ignored by the Allies until it was too late. It was the gun that wasn't a gun, until it became the most feared killing machine of the Second World War. To understand why the 88mm became a legend, we must first understand the desperate secrecy of its birth. The story doesn't begin in the 1930s, but in the humiliation of 1919. The Treaty of Versailles had stripped Germany of its military might. Heavy artillery was banned. Anti-aircraft development was strictly forbidden. The Allies believed they had declawed the German eagle. But inside the offices of Krupp, Germany's industrial titan, engineers were not dismantling their blueprints, they were hiding them. Realizing they couldn't develop weapons on German soil, Krupp did something ingenious. They created a shell company in Sweden called Bofors, a name that would become famous in its own right, and sent their best German engineers across the Baltic Sea. There, safe from the prying eyes of French and British inspectors, they began to dream. The German military doctrine was shifting. They weren't just looking for a gun to protect cities, they were looking for a weapon that could travel with a mobile army. The specifications were demanding. It needed a high rate of fire, a heavy projectile, and extreme velocity to reach the new generation of high-altitude bombers. The result was the Flak 18. On paper, it was a masterpiece of anti-aircraft engineering. It had a 56 caliber barrel that could fling a 20-pound shell up to 26,000 feet. But the true genius, the detail that would eventually doom thousands of Allied tankers, was in the base. Krupp designed a cruciform gun carriage. Unlike traditional artillery that had to be laboriously staked into the ground in a fixed direction, the 88 could be lowered onto its forelegs in 2 minutes. Once set, it could traverse 360 degrees instantly. It was stable, it was rapid, and crucially, it could fire horizontally just as easily as it could fire vertically. The designers at Krupp saw this horizontal capability as a self-defense measure. If enemy infantry got too close to the AA battery, the gunners could lower the barrel and defend themselves. No one in the German High Command in 1933 envisioned this skyscraper-sized gun engaging a moving tank. It would be overkill. It would be a waste of expensive ammunition. But war has a way of mocking intentions. The dress rehearsal for World War II took place in the dusty hills of Spain during the Civil War. Hitler sent the Condor Legion to support General Franco, not just for ideological reasons, but to use Spain as a live-fire testing ground for his new war machine. Among the equipment sent were the first batteries of Flak 18s. The Luftwaffe commanders in Spain encountered a frustrating problem. The Soviet-supplied bombers used by the Republicans were few and far between. The German gun crews spent days scanning the empty blue sky, bored, baking in the heat, polishing shells they rarely fired. Meanwhile, on the ground, the war was brutal. The Republicans had fortified bunkers and pillboxes that German light artillery couldn't crack. One afternoon, a frustrated German commander, possibly acting on a hunch or perhaps out of sheer boredom, ordered his 88 crews to lower their barrels. They aimed at a distant pillbox, over 2 kilometers away. The gunner looked through the direct-fire telescopic sight, a piece of equipment that was considered secondary. He squeezed the trigger. The result was catastrophic. The high-velocity shell didn't just hit the bunker, it obliterated it. The shell was moving so fast that it punched through the concrete before detonating inside. The bunker buster was born. Reports filtered back to Berlin. The 88 is effective against ground targets, the memos read. But the High Command was slow to react. They pigeonholed the 88 as an anti-aircraft weapon. It was the Luftwaffe's property, not the Army's. This bureaucratic rivalry almost cost Germany the war before it began. But one man was paying attention. One man read the reports from Spain and saw not a bunker buster, but a key to a new kind of warfare. His name was Erwin Rommel. Fast forward to May 1940. The Battle of France. The German blitzkrieg is sweeping across Europe. The speed of the advance is blinding. But on May 21st, near the town of Arras, the gears of the German war machine ground to a terrifying halt. The British launched a counterattack. It was a desperate gamble, led by the 4th and 7th Royal Tank Regiments. Their Matilda tanks were slow, but their armor was, for the time, impenetrable. General Rommel, commanding the 7th Panzer Division, watched in horror as his anti-tank battalion opened fire. The standard German anti-tank gun was the 37mm Pak 36. The German troops called it the Heeresankloppgerät, the army door knocker. The crews fired frantically at the advancing British steel. They watched the tracer rounds hit the Matildas and ricochet harmlessly into the sky. The British tanks didn't even slow down. They rolled over the German gun positions, crushing the cannons beneath their tracks. Panic began to spread through the SS Totenkopf division protecting Rommel's flank. Infantrymen were breaking. That invincible the German army was about to be overrun by a handful of British tanks. Rommel, standing amidst the chaos, made a split-second decision that would change military history. He spotted a battery of 88mm Flak guns belonging to a Luftwaffe unit nearby. They were deployed to protect a bridge from air attacks. Rommel sprinted to the battery commander. "Lower your guns," he ordered. "Target those tanks." The Luftwaffe commander hesitated. This was against regulations. These were anti-aircraft guns. "Do it or we die," Rommel screamed. The crews frantically cranked the elevation wheels, bringing the massive barrels down to horizontal. The Matildas were closing in, 1,500 meters, 1,000 meters. The 88s opened fire. The effect was horrifyingly absolute. A 37mm shell relies on kinetic energy, like a hammer hitting a wall. If the wall is too thick, the hammer bounces. The 88mm shell was different. It was like a freight train moving at supersonic speeds. When the first 88mm round struck a Matilda, it didn't bounce. It tore through the armor plate, passed through the fighting compartment, the engine block, and exited the rear of the tank. In minutes, the British counterattack was vaporized. Smoke columns from burning Matildas rose into the sky. The door knocker had failed, but that skysweeper had saved the division. After the battle, Rommel inspected the wreckage. He found British tanks with holes he could put his arm through. He realized then that the age of light anti-tank guns was over. He had found his hammer. To understand the impact of this weapon, we have to step away from the mechanics and into the mind of the Allied soldier. By 1942, the 88 had become a boogeyman. In the memoirs of British and American soldiers, almost every incoming artillery shell is described as an 88. While often inaccurate, it was frequently 75mm or 105mm fire. This exaggeration reveals the psychological trauma the weapon inflicted. Why was it so feared? First, the sound. Most artillery shells travel in a high arc. You hear the whump of the gun firing, then the whistling of the shell as it descends, giving you a split second to dive for cover. The 88, when used in an anti-tank role, fired a high-velocity round with a flat trajectory. The shell traveled faster than the speed of sound. This meant that if an 88 was firing at you, the shell would hit you before you heard the gun fire. Soldiers called it the whiz-bang. You'd hear the whiz of the shell passing, or the explosion if it hit, followed by the bang of the gun firing seconds later. There was no warning. You were alive one moment, and dead the next. Second, the accuracy. The 88 had excellent optics designed for tracking fast-moving planes at 5 miles. Targeting a slow-moving tank at 1 mile was, for a skilled German crew, child's play. Allied tankers knew that if they exposed themselves for more than a few seconds, they were dead. This created a paralysis on the battlefield. An entire armored column could be held up by a single reported 88 battery. One British tank commander in North Africa wrote in his diary, "It feels like they are cheating. We can't see them. We can't hit them. But they can put a shell through our front glacis from 2 miles away. It's not war, it's execution." This sentiment, that the Germans were cheating, persisted. There was a sense of indignation among British officers that the Germans were using AA guns against tanks. It was seen as unsporting, a violation of the proper rules of engagement. But the Germans weren't interested in sport. They were interested in winning. The 88mm became the cornerstone of Rommel's tactics in North Africa. The desert was the perfect environment for the gun. Flat, open terrain with long sight lines. Rommel developed the fire trap. He would send his light Panzer III tanks forward to bait the British. When the British armor gave chase, the Panzers would feign a retreat. They would flee back toward a line of hidden 88s, dug deep into the sand with only their barrels exposed, covered in camouflage netting. The British, thinking the Germans were on the run, would charge recklessly, straight into the concave killing zone of the 88s. At the Battle of Gazala in 1942, this tactic reached its zenith. The British 8th Army lost hundreds of tanks. They simply had no counter. Their tanks had to get within 800 yards to fire effectively. The 88s could kill them at 2,000 yards. It was a mathematical disparity that courage could not overcome. A captured German gunner, interrogated by the British, was asked how they managed to hit tanks at such ranges. He shrugged and said, "It is much easier than hitting an airplane, and the tank cannot fly away." As the war dragged on, the secret was out. The Allies began to adapt, using artillery and air power to target the exposed 88 crews. The 88 had a weakness: it was a towed gun. The crew was exposed. If you could get close enough with a machine gun, or drop a mortar round on them, the gun was silenced. The Germans realized they needed to protect the gun. They needed to put the 88 inside a tank. This birthed the legend of the Tiger. The Tiger I was essentially a heavy armored box designed to carry the 88mm gun, specifically the kilowatt K36 adaptation. When the Tiger appeared on the Eastern Front and in North Africa, the psychological terror of the 88 became mobile. Now, the Allies weren't just facing a hidden gun, they were facing a monster that could walk through walls. There is a famous account from the Battle of Villers-Bocage in Normandy, 1944. Michael Wittmann, a German tank ace, used his Tigers 88 to destroy 14 tanks, 15 personnel carriers, and 2 anti-tank guns in the span of 15 minutes. Read the accounts of the British crews involved. It wasn't a battle, it was a horror movie. They watched their shells bounce off the Tiger's armor while the 88 turned their vehicles into burning coffins one by one. The 88 allowed the Tiger to stand off and engage targets well beyond the reach of the Allied Shermans and Cromwells. But the Germans didn't stop there. They developed the King Tiger, armed with the even longer, more powerful 88mm kilowatt K-43. This gun could punch through the frontal armor of any Allied tank from ranges where the Allied tank couldn't even see the King Tiger. By 1944, the Americans had arrived in force. They brought with them their own industrial might and their own weapons. Interestingly, the US military possessed a weapon arguably better than the German 88, the 90mm M1-M2 anti-aircraft gun. The 90mm fired a heavier shell. It had better radar. It was a technological marvel. So, the question historians often ask is, why didn't the Americans use the 90mm like the Germans used the 88? The answer lies in doctrine, not mechanics. The US Army was rigid. Anti-aircraft units shot at planes. Tank destroyer units shot at tanks. Artillery units shot at ground targets. Crossing those lines was discouraged. While American GIs were being torn apart by German 88s in the hedgerows of Normandy, American 90mm guns were often sitting a few miles back, pointed at the sky, waiting for Luftwaffe planes that rarely appeared. It wasn't until the Battle of the Bulge, in late 1944, that desperate American commanders finally began using the 90mm in a direct-fire role against King Tigers. When they did, they found it worked beautifully. But it was a lesson learned too late for thousands of soldiers. This highlights the true brilliance of the German 88 story. It wasn't just that the gun was good, it was that the German military culture on the ground encouraged flexibility and improvisation. They allowed the tool to dictate the tactic, not the rulebook. As the Third Reich collapsed, the 88mm returned to its roots, but in a tragic and grotesque way. In the final months of the war, with Allied bombers pulverizing German cities, the 88s were pulled back to defend the homeland. Massive flak towers, concrete castles purely designed for war, rose in Berlin, Hamburg, and Vienna. These towers bristled with grouped 88mm guns, often double mountings. But as the Russian army encircled Berlin, the skies became empty. The 88s lowered their barrels one last time. In the streets of Berlin, 1945, the once proud crews of the Luftwaffe were gone. In their place were the Volkssturm, old men and teenage boys from the Hitler Youth. We have accounts of 15-year-old boys, tears streaming down their faces, manning these complex weapons against the endless waves of Soviet T-34s. The 88, which had dominated the open deserts of Africa and the steppes of Russia, was now fighting in the rubble of its own birthplace. It was a weapon of empire, now reduced to a weapon of desperate suicide. In one final twist of irony, the US Army captured so many 88s intact that they actually printed their own firing manuals for them and used them against the remaining German forces. The weapon had become so ubiquitous, so essential to the nature of the conflict, that even its enemies adopted it. When we look back at the arsenal of World War II, we see the sleek Spitfire, the rugged Jeep, and the atomic bomb. But the 88mm stands alone as a symbol of adaptability. It teaches us a profound lesson about warfare and innovation. The experts at Krupp didn't design a tank killer. The generals in Berlin didn't order a tank killer. The weapon emerged because a few desperate men in the field looked at what they had and asked, "What if?" The 88mm destroyed thousands of tanks, sank ships, pulverized bunkers, and yes, occasionally shot down a plane. It was the gun that wasn't a gun. It was a solution to a problem the Germans didn't know they had, until the moment they needed it most. For the Allied soldiers who faced it, the 88 was the Grim Reaper of the battlefield. As one surviving veteran of the 7th Armored Division put it decades later, "The history books say we won the war. And we did. But every time I hear a car backfire, I'm back in that desert, waiting for the 88 that has my name on it."